This is an independent virologist and vaccine expert who's also his credentials include he's formerly employed at Gavi. I don't know what Gavi is. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we've got 3 papers, all of which he's just written and posted on his LinkedIn page, and he's also got a few YouTube interviews out now, and he is basically trying to raise the alarm about the risk of mass vaccination of the sort of vaccines that we've got now during a pandemic, being, he is arguing, likely to actually cause COVID-19 to become a much worse problem than it already is, and in fact become a global nightmare, the likes of which we've never seen. That's his statement. That's it. That's his position.
And he does say, I think he alludes to the fact that he has a manuscript that covers this, that he is putting through proper channels, but he says we don't have time, which is why I'm posting it in this way.
Yeah. And so we really just, truth in advertising here. A friend of mine sent me one of these papers a couple days ago, actually on my Patreon, and said, can you tell me what to think of this? And I spent a little bit of time with it. And I will say that one of these 3 papers, the one that I was sent first, the one dated, so there's a March 13th, a March 17th, and a March 6th. And the March 6th one, and I'll post these all on the show notes as well. The March 6th one is weird. It's tough to get through, and it makes a bunch of claims that seem bizarre. And it was hard to parse. But the later papers, and we're still talking about just within a few days of now, are very much more clear. And he's also given a ton of references, which I have not had time to look through the vast majority of them yet. But the basic framework is we are not thinking about this evolutionarily, and the refusal to do so risks a whole lot of humanity. And that is a base claim is a perfect match for what we've been saying from the beginning, that we need to think about what this virus will do, how it will change. Understanding, therefore, its origins affects what we can imagine it will be able to do quickly if it came directly from either a primary or secondary host, or if it experienced gain-of-function research and serial passaging in a lab and therefore is already sort of pre-adapted as of a year plus ago to human hosts. These are not merely academic questions. They actually potentially affect human health, and he brings that into the vaccine framework specifically.
Yeah, I will say I found these papers challenging, and there were a couple places where I wondered if we were tripping over a language issue, where he used terms that I think actually aren't the right terms, but that there was an argument. So I will say I don't find that this is like the Judy Mikovich situation, where there were claims that were made that were simple enough to falsify that it just red flags all over the place.
Yep.
In this case, I don't have that.
Or those 2 doctors out of Kern County early, last spring, who were making a lot of claims that just were easily falsifiable.
Yep.
This is not that.
This is not that. So at the basic level, and I think your summary is right, the basic argument here, so there are specific arguments which I'll try to make clearer in a second, but the basic argument that we are not thinking evolutionarily about what we're doing, and we are blindly stumbling into this landscape, we are intervening in a way that could make things worse and not better, is accurate. And I definitely think, we are long overdue to be having an evolutionary conversation about this virus and our approach to it. Interestingly, I do not find in what I've read here an analog for the argument that you and I have made, that that these vaccines are so narrowly targeted that instead of using a complete virus by using the spike protein as a single target, that these vaccines are very narrowly focused, and that is going to create a concentrated evolutionary pressure. So
yeah, I thought I had seen that in here somewhere, but I don't see it now. But so that's a particular argument that we have made.
So he makes analogous arguments.
Yes.
So my thinking is either it's in here and I don't see it, or it's not in here and it belongs in the same discussion.
There's a whole category of possibilities that deserve to have consideration. And it feels like he's got a few possibilities and they're not always totally teased apart carefully. But he's proposing a few things, right?
Yeah.
He's proposing, for instance, that mass vaccination during a time of pandemic puts humanity at risk, because if you vaccinate when those who are recently vaccinated, just tell me if you think I've got this right. If you get vaccinated when you are unlikely to run into the wild type pathogen out there in the world, your body will have time to create immunity to it when you do run into it. But during a pandemic, you're likely to run into the thing that you have just been vaccinated against before you actually have immunity to it. And this may basically produce an ability for the virus to adapt and become immune itself, to adapt away from the vaccine.
It's not that you don't have immunity to it, because presumably whatever level of immunity you don't have, you have before the vaccination. His point is that there is a stage after you have been vaccinated the first time and before you have been vaccinated the second time and had the period in which for your immune system to become specifically targeted,
right,
that you are effectively weakly immune, and that weak immunity therefore selects for the invisibility of the virus to the vaccine. And so this is in many ways analogous to the thing that you and I are talking about, which is the narrow focus of our vaccines. Now, it may be that they can only be narrowly focused. It may be that there's nothing else in this virus that actually is accessible to the immune system, and therefore it may be that there's no consequence to what you and I have worried about. But I'd like to know that that's true rather than just it's something we assume.
Yeah.
But so he seems to be making 2 points. One is that the partial immunity that people get from this vaccine on the way to being immunized is,
assuming they're effective,
right, is an evolutionary pressure that these vaccines do not appear to be good at preventing people from transmitting viruses that they've already been infected with. I'd like to know if that's the case. I know that this has been suspected.
This has been suspected, but yeah, I saw that claim here too. I mean, there's no reference. Like, I don't know this to be true yet.
But let's say it is true. His point is that what we are effectively doing is creating what is, to unfortunately use the same word I just used, in effect, like running a gain-of-function experiment with humanity by creating a concentrated evolutionary pressure for the invisibility. And he imagines that very disastrous things could be the result of this, which I don't think are certain, but are plausible as far as I can tell. So
I agree. He also argues, and I think you may be able to add clarity to this because I wasn't sure exactly what his argument was. He argues something like, given that COVID, absent the regime of vaccination, has affected older people more and more seriously, as everyone on the planet knows at this point. Therefore, older people are being vaccinated first, which would appear to be the appropriate move. But that leaves a situation in which another way that the virus may evolve in response to this, if there is basically, and I'm adding this here, but especially if there's a slow, if the goal is to get everyone vaccinated, if there's a slow rollout, and then the virus can't get purchase on increasing numbers of the older population, that it is going to evolve precisely to become more likely to infect younger people. And he argues, I believe, in one of these papers, that because we also have at the same time children who have been pretty isolated for a long time and who are now about to go back into schools, that this may create sort of a perfect petri dish situation.
Well,
let me clarify. I'm not sure I buy this.
Let me clarify his argument, just so we at least know what we're talking about.
Okay.
So he makes 2 arguments. The first one, related to what we've already talked about, is that our behavior deploying what he says are prophylactic vaccines in the midst of a pandemic. So his point is, and he makes very clear he's not an anti-vaxxer, he's very pro-vax, But his point is, look, if you were to deploy these vaccines in advance of a pathogen arriving somewhere, it might be very effective at ratcheting up the immune response so that the virus would not get a purchase on the population. If you do it in the context of a pandemic already in motion, his point is what you're doing is you are confronting a virus which has the capacity to evolve with a concentrated
With selection pressure.
with a selection pressure. And his point is it cannot help but push this virus into an arms race, which I think is right and is consistent with what you and I have said. And that arms race is very likely to have these other consequences, which is where this point about young people versus old people comes up.
Just one point of order, though. You said that he says, and I see it in the papers too, he calls it prophylactic vaccine. That seems redundant to me. Vaccines are inherently prophylactic. Prophylaxis being about prevention,
right,
rather than retreating of symptoms.
It's an individual versus population level question. When he says a prophylactic vaccine, he's talking about the population level. And for an individual, yes, it's prophylactic either way.
So you think that his argument there is that the vaccine itself is designed to be prophylactic at a population level, and it is being used in a situation where the population has already been so widely exposed and continues to be exposed that it is not being deployed in a way that is consistent with prophylaxis.
Right. And there is a very powerful evolutionary argument here, which is it is the arms race that creates the ferocious enemy, right? And so you do not want to invite an arms race you cannot win. And in this case, the point is we're making this move because we don't have another, right? And so we're making a move that we shouldn't make because what it's going to do is turn our enemy much more dangerous than it is. And I'm not saying that that's true. I think there are ways in which this could be false, but it is not obvious to me that it is false, right? And in fact, the arms race part of it is almost certain to be true. So the second part of the argument, and there is one part of this that may be well known, but I don't know it, and so I'm cautious about it. But his point is that actually by keeping young people away from each other and society, that we are weakening their what's called innate immunity. So, and he deploys a model that I think is quite valuable the way he puts it. Basically, that we start out with innate immunity, that is to say, an immune system
in our lives as neonates,
right? That doesn't have to generate novel insight. So when we get sick with something like the flu, we've never seen it before. It gets past our defenses, and then we build an immunity to it, and then we build a memory of that immunity, right? So that is adaptive immunity, and it's actually one of the most marvelous evolutionary stories there is. It's evolution that takes place in your lifetime, inside your body, between your cells. So young people have the innate immunity, but it is not programmed with the adaptive component, which results from encounters with things in the world.
We expect our adaptive immunity to get better over time.
Right. And so the model he deploys is over time, as you age, your innate immunity weakens, you get more vulnerable, but your adaptive immunity grows better because it has seen the things in your environment for the most part.
It becomes wise.
Right. It becomes wise. Exactly. And so the point is older people are feeble with respect to their ability to keep stuff out, but they're better with respect to being able to fight stuff that their immune system is aware of. Now, the part of this that I think is insecure, and it may be that it is well known.
The part of his argument that you think is insecure.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding.
It's right there to the left of the.
So my understanding of this is all kind of old because came from a course that involved that textbook. But in any case, the argument he makes is that the innate immunity, and he uses a bad analogy, but if we can correct it, I think what he means to say is that the innate immunity is in some sense like a muscle, that to the extent that your innate immunity is not encountering things in the wild, it stands down, it atrophies. And so by isolating young people, that we would be reducing their capacity to fend off, why are young people immune to this? It's not because their immune systems are aware of COVID. It's because their immune systems are good at generally dealing with stuff and preventing it from getting in your cells.
They don't have adaptive immunity. They do have very strong innate immunity. This does raise the question of why so many pathogens are so much more likely to attack young people. But to generalize further what you're saying by analogy to muscles is what he is saying. The argument is that innate immunity is anti-fragile, right? That it becomes better with insult. It becomes better with pressures against it.
Right. And so anyway, I want to know, there's the problem is that there are two arguments that overlap. So George Carlin had a very famous routine in which he argued that he didn't get sick because he had swum in the Hudson, and right. But anyway, so the
The
point
old
is,
"what doesn't kill you makes you stronger" argument, right?
right, and the point is,
Yeah.
we know that this will have some reality over an adaptive immunity space. That in effect, the challenges cause your immunity to learn about things in the environment. The argument that it's happening on the innate immunity may be true, but I want to see the evidence that it is.
Yeah, this was exactly one of the places I hung up too. Like, I don't know about this claim, and
But
yeah.
but anyway, the consequence of all of this is, his point is, we are creating what he is arguing is effectively a perfect storm in which we are setting up an arms race with the virus, where the virus will mutate away into invisibility to the immune system. So we will educate the immune system, basically like putting up a wanted poster in the post office that alerts the immune system to who it's looking for. The enemy will disguise itself and be able to move in without being spotted, and that will then result in it honing in on young people who have not been exposed and are therefore vulnerable, and basically they would be a reservoir of potential victims of the virus, and that this could create a catastrophe. So I think where I come out on this is, this argument definitely needs to be heard. What I don't want, and what we are forced to effectively by the way that we are dealing with this pandemic, is I don't want either people with perverse incentives to tell us why this isn't true, right? What I want is people who are immune to pressure, right, and aware of various different relevant aspects of this, to be able to have a conversation in which they determine it. Because effectively what he's arguing is that we should pull these vaccines, right?
Now.
That
Yep.
we are in fact going to destroy herd immunity, which would grow, right? Grow with huge costs, right? We are going to destroy the herd immunity that we've already inadvertently invested so heavily in, and create effectively a novel and much worse, much more infective pandemic. Now, that is a plausible argument. Is it a true argument? I can see ways in which it could be. I can also see reasons that it might not be.
Yep.
But the discussion is where you would find that out. You need people who are sophisticated about the evolutionary stuff to have, a candid conversation with each other about what would the effect of this be if X, Y, or Z. And I have very little doubt we're not going to get that discussion.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I don't know where that leaves us. I think I'm glad that he's out there saying what he's saying, and I would like the conversations between people who are interested in truth and who do not have perverse incentives to be happening. And instead, it just seems like there's a rapid fire exchange of, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? And no, it couldn't be because it doesn't suit my worldview responses.
Well, I would say I see that, but I also think that, the most frustrating aspect is, why are people dealing with this as if they are not intervening in a complex system, right? This is something that you and I have been saying consistently, which is, you're dealing with the most complex of complex systems. You're talking about intervening in immunity, where you have, evolutionary phenomenon on the part of the immune system, evolutionary phenomena on the part of the viruses, and interactions. So, one of the things I don't think he does say anywhere in what I've seen is, where is the invisibility for this virus, right? To the extent that we create pressure to not look like what we already know it looks like, and that causes variants to emerge that are more or less invisible to the immune system. Well, that can be a permanent arms race. We can keep chasing the virus and keep reinforming the immune system, and that is likely to have costs. I don't know what they are. Or it could be that the virus finds a hole in the immune system, and the holes in the immune system people who have watched our live streams before will remember discussions of self versus non-self recognition, that our system basically recognizes anything organic that doesn't match molecules we ourselves produce, right? That's an amazing magic trick of development that basically is the basis of the adaptive immune response. However, because our systems have to not respond to self, right, in order for this magic trick to work, that means that to the extent that we push a virus into looking more like us at a molecular level, it becomes invisible in a way that we can't chase it. And so what role this has to play in something like autoimmunity, if a virus becomes molecularly similar enough to something that you create yourself that the immune system can't see it, then the immune system either pursues it and attacks your tissues or doesn't pursue it and it escapes. And so anyway,
you're sick one way or the other.
Right. And so the question, we've been talking about autoimmunity as one of the things that it ought to be on people's radar. Cancer ought to be on people's radar. Autoimmunity ought to be on people's radar. These are general failure modes that arise from the fact that this complex system is predicated on certain kinds of assumptions. And if you push one way, you're going to end up here, you're going to end up there, you're going to end up there. You got autoimmunity, you got cancer, you got destruction of tissue and aging, right? These are all failure modes, and we're pushing on them as if we know what we're doing. And the fact is, no, it's very early in the discovery of all of the biological phenomena in question. We're not experts.